Hi, my name is Deborah Rubles and I live in Lebanon, Missouri, and I decided to do this video to go along with my new book called The Quilters Cutting Guide, the Sliding Ruler Method. And there's one thing about quilters. If you ask a group of quilters what's the one thing they like the most and the one thing they hate the most, the one thing they like the most is the creativity and having a finished product. But the thing that they hate the most is cutting, and especially when they have to use a rotary cutter to cut with. So I've been quilting for more than 15 years, and when I first started quilting, I did not know what a rotary cutter or a cutting mat was. I was new with all the different equipment and the different notions and so on. Since then, I've tried out a whole bunch of equipment, different notions, different cutting tools and everything. And now I have a group of notions and cutting tools that I use on an everyday basis. And these are the tools that I recommend to new quilters and also to experienced quilters. But one of the first things about cutting out your fabric is to make sure that you prepare. So what I'm going to do is show you some steps where you can prepare your fabric and then cut your fabric, because our motto is going to be is cut less and quilt more. I'm going to show you the steps for the sliding ruler method. And the sliding ruler method, there's nothing magic about it or anything or any special techniques. It's just a different technique than from what you are probably currently cutting. The first step though on getting ready for your cutting is to prepare your fabric. And this is a beautiful brand new kit that I bought at one of our local quilt stores. With the fabric I just got it out of the bag like this. The fabric is all folded up like this. It came, of course, with a pattern of a beautiful quilt. One of the first things I will do in getting organized to help me cut better is to make a color chart. And to make a color chart, I will look at the pattern, and then some patterns will actually have a color chart available. This one did, and not that we're focusing on the color chart so much, but what I wanted to show you is that I took these fabrics and then matched them with the fabrics in here, and I made my own color chart by labeling, like for instance, this is A, this fabric is B, and so on. So then later, as I'm cutting out the fabric or as I'm putting my project together, I have the color chart that I can refer back to. To make this color chart, I just simply open up the fabric and I go to a corner edge and I'll cut out a piece about 2 inches long and about a 1/2 inch thick. Like so, which I've already done here because this is our fabric A. And then I'll just tape it on there. So it's nothing fancy or anything, just simple. So I have my color chart ready. Now the first step, so that's part of preparing your fabrics, get that color chart. And this is a 2-page color chart, or 2 cards. You notice I use 5x7 index cards. The next thing I do is I look in the pattern, I look for the cutting instructions. Some of the patterns in today's some of the patterns will give you very detailed instructions of what to cut and how to cut. However, many of them will not. Many of them may say, just cut you 240 2.5 inch squares. I was fortunate this pattern was fairly detailed. For instance, on fabric A, it says to cut 4 borders 4.5 inches and cut 1 square 6.5 inch. So what I will do is I get my 3x3 little Post-its, and the first thing I'll do is I'm going to write the cutting instructions for each of my fabrics onto a Post-it. And this pattern, it says fabric A, and as I know, fabric A is this fabric, which is this one. So I will write A at the top of the Post-it, and then I will write 4 1/2 inch strips, 1 6.5. Once I'm done writing it, I then pin it to my fabric. And then I continue on with the rest of the fabrics and so on. So I will soon have my stack of fabric all ready to take to the cutting mat. They're all labeled, and each one has an individual cutting instructions. And that is important to me because what I found is that when you take the pattern itself to the cutting mat, it's very easy to get confused when you're looking at it because your eyes are focused on your fabric and on your rulers and how you cut, but at the same time you're trying to follow, oh, what was I supposed to cut here? I'm supposed to cut this much for so on. Anyway, it can get very confusing. This way we have one fabric with one cutting instructions. So this is part of preparing your fabric, which is step one of the sliding ruler method. Part of step one, preparing your fabric, also includes pressing it and then folding it. This is all part of step one of the sliding ruler method. And so I have my fabrics that have the Post-its on it over here by the ironing board. And what I'll do is that I'll take off the Post-it, just lay it there, and then I'll press my fabric. Now I don't spend a lot of time pressing it. You just want to get any major wrinkles off. And it's nice if you have an ironing board that's raised up a little bit higher than the normal because it's easier on your back. And the fabric, since it's yardage, we want it to be across. So what I'm going to do is just put it over a net edge and just run an iron over it and then pull it towards me. And I'm just working and looking for any big wrinkles in it. So that's press, but then this is one of the key steps on the sliding ruler method. We have to make sure all our fabric is folded prior to taking it to the cutting table. I have found that the ironing board is the best place. Once you get done pressing it, then go ahead and fold it. So the first thing is that it's folded. When you buy your yardage, most of it has a natural fold in it, and it's folded with the selvage edges together. The selvage edges are the raw edges, usually has some kind of writing on it. So we're going to fold it selvage edge to selvage edge, which it already is. Then you're going to fold it in half again. Let's smooth it out. But one thing about this is that as you fold it, you're keeping the fold at your belly and the selvage edges away from you. After it's folded that way, then I want you to bring it in 8 to 10 inches from the right hand side, and then just keep folding it up. And once it's all folded up, you pin your Post-it back to it. Now this fabric is ready to take it to the cutting table. That completes part one of the sliding ruler method, because part two is next. Going to our step two of the sliding ruler method, I did want to talk a little bit about the tools that I use. Now there's many tools, as I said earlier, out there at your local quilt store that you can buy. You can try them out. The ones that I'm using are the ones that I've been using now for a couple years and found that they work great for me. The first thing is your cutting mat. This cutting mat is 3 millimeters in thickness, and it's a self-healing. There's all different brands of cutting mats that you can buy. I recommend the one that's 3 millimeters in thickness and self-healing because I found they last longer. They also do not slide on your table as much as some of the other ones that are not as thick. The next thing are the rulers. Now, there are so many rulers out there, and there's a lot of specialized rulers now that the quilt designers are coming up with and they're promoting. I'm just using the basic rulers. There's no specialized ruler required for the sliding ruler method. What I recommend is that you have a 15-inch square ruler, that you have an 8.5 inches by 12-inch ruler, and that you also have an 8.5 by 24-inch ruler. And if you notice, all of my rulers are the same brand. And it's important that when you pick out your rulers that you consider what type of cutting mat you're going to be using it on, because The cutting mats come in black, green, orange, red, white, all different colors and so on. So anyway, when you put your rulers on top of your cutting mat, you want to make sure you can see the numbers well. I have found that this ruler works well on this orange and also green cutting mats. Okay. There's one thing I have on all my rulers which I think is very important, and that is this protective shield that is it's a super sticky tape that was used to adhere to the ruler. This shield protects your fingers from your rotary cutter if you keep your fingers back behind it. And also the best thing is you can pick up these rulers, because I'm sure as quilters know, it's very hard to pick up these rulers when they're without a picker-upper on it. And I have tried every kind of picker-upper that they have sold over the years, and I have ended up with these. They do not come off. And the one that did come off was because I packed it in my car wrong and something created some pressure on it or something. But anyway, I just super glued it back on. Now these, I do want to talk about these because they're important. They help you prevent from getting scars. Most of my quilting friends do have some kind of scar because their fingers tangled up with the rotary cutter, and the rotary cutter is a razor blade. So that's why I'm talking about these protective shields. They come in packages of 22 inches long. They have a sticky tape on the back of them. So you just simply take it out of the package, pull that tape off, and then you place it on your ruler. Now, you know, as I said, it's 22 inches long. If for these smaller rulers, you'll have to cut that plastic shield and then put it on here. When you place them on your rulers, also, I have found that the best place to put them is about 1 3/4 inches to 2 1/4 inches from your edge. So approximately from 1 1/2 to there. And you're putting them close to the edge, but not all the way in the edge, because your fingers are going to be holding this and you're going to be cutting against it, and you need to be applying pressure to the cutting edge. So that's why. One other thing about these is that I recommend that you keep at least about 1 inch wiggle room up here and about 1 inch wiggle room down here, because my rotary cutter has tangled up with this shield when I had it flush. Okay. The last tool I want to talk about is your rotary cutters. If you notice, I have the same brand, both of them. I've tried the other brands, and again, this one is this rotary cutter is probably about 10 years old. A rotary cutter, as many of you know, as you know, is a razor. It has a razor blade in it, and you can easily change out the blades, and the blades are interchangeable from one brand to another as far as the type of cutter. The size that I use every day is the 45 millimeter. This is a large one, a 60 millimeter. I use this one when I get my quilts back from the Quilters and have to cut batting, cut through layers of fabric. I did want to quickly show you that to take the blade off, you just simply unscrew this part, and as you take the parts apart, line them up so you know how to put them back. So there, and then the blade would come off. And you want to dispose of that blade either by taping it to a piece of cardboard and putting it in your trash, or put it in the container the new one comes in. So again, to put it back together, simply follow your way you took it apart, and very easy. Okay, there is a locking device. All the rotary cutters have a locking device, so that when it's not in use, you just push the button and you cannot, the blade does not come out. Okay, push the button, then it does. Step 2, a sliding ruler method, is to square your fabric. The first thing is that notice this layout of my cutting table. I have my cutting mat and recommend the 24 by 36 inch cutting mat. I have my rulers. I have a big 15-inch square ruler on my left-hand side. I am right-handed. And I have the smaller ruler on my right. And I have my rotary cutter on the right-hand side. I have a little basket here to put the rotary cutter in, because if you need to try to get in the habit of always putting your rotary cutter back in the same place, or else you'll be looking for it because it's got to be under your fabric or something. And then I have my large 8.5 by 24 inch ruler out here, because I don't use that all the time, but I use it a lot. Then the other thing I have is a basket here, and that basket is for my scraps. So I just try to hit the basket half the time. Try to hit it. Okay, so the first step in squaring your fabric is take the Post-it off the fabric and stick it under the edge of the cutting mat so that it won't blow away, and leave it so that you can see it. And then place your fabric on your cutting mat. You notice it's still folded up neatly. You're going to place it approximately 2 inches up from the edge, bottom edge of the cut, and 2 inches in from the left. And then I'm going to unfold the fabric the length of the cutting mat, or approximately 24 inches. Keep it folded right there. This cutting instruction says I have to cut 7 2.5 inch strips. So out of this fabric, I need to cut a 2.5 inch strips. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 of them. I had to cut 7 2.5 inch strips. But before I can cut anything, I have to square the fabric. And this is the same no matter what you're cutting. Usually the first step you'll have to do is you need a straight edge or a square edge so that you can measure your strips. And to do this, I always use 2 rulers. Second step in the sliding ruler method is to square your fabric. And to square it, I use 2 rulers. Whenever you square any kind of fabric, whether you're cutting strips or squares or large pieces, you need to square the fabric first. You need to use 2 rulers. This way you don't have to, there's many different ways of squaring fabric. You can square on the right edge and then pick up your fabric and turn around it, or go around the table. But with this method, you've squared it, you don't have to move your fabric. And one thing about quilting, and when you're cutting, you want to move your fabric as little as possible, because the more you move it, it will get out of square, and then you have to square up a straight edge again. So to square fabric, you need 2 rulers. I will start with this small one, and I line it up, a dark line, or the 1 inch or the 2 inch line, on the fold of my fabric. You know, in math class they taught us you need 2 points to have a straight line. Well, to have a straight edge or a square edge in quilting, you need to have 2 points. It's about the same. So the fold on your fabric, I consider that's one of your points. So that's why we're lining up a line on the ruler on the fold of the fabric. And I'm moving it over approximately, well, it's over close to the edge. You need to make sure that you've caught all 4 layers of your fabric. So you see all 4 layers, it's fine. And then what I'm going to do, I'm applying pressure to this ruler, this big ruler. Now, I use a big ruler because I like having what I call wiggle room up here and down here below the fabric. You have some room up here and here. That way it helps the fabric stay down, and the ruler will not slide as much. Butt it up gently next to it. Apply pressure with your left hand, and then what we're going to do is slide this ruler over, pick up your rotary cutter, and cut. Put the line up, the dark line on the fold, apply pressure, pick this one up, butt it against it gently, apply pressure, slide this over, get your rotary cutter, and cut. And there's our square edge. And that is the second step of the sliding ruler method. The third and last step of the sliding ruler method is to actually cut your strips. And in this we have to, according to my Post-it, we have to cut 7 2.5 inch strips. So what I'll do in my Quilters cutting guide, I'll open up the book and go to the 2.5 inch page. I find the 2.5 inches, I flip it open, and then I'll lay it right up here in front of me. In this book, what it shows is the number of strips that are needed to cut where we're going to cut on as far as the measurement. And the third column is simply the number of squares that you will get if you cut that many strips. And that is some extra information. It's right now, it's not part of what I'm doing as far as cutting the 7 2.5-inch strips. So I'll come back to that and talk about that again. But we need to cut 7 2.5-inch strips. So I know I'm on the 2.5-inch page because it's 2.5-inch down here at the bottom. And I have to cut 7 strips. Now this goes up to 6 strips. So I'm going to cut 6 strips and I'm going to cut 1 more. So with this, I look at the number of strips and then I run my finger over to the number. I'm going to lay my ruler on the 15-inch mark. And that's another reason why I use the big square ruler, because if you're cutting many strips, you need to have this many inches. Anyway, you need to have a big ruler to actually accommodate it. So what I'll do is that I'll put the ruler, the 15-inch mark on the ruler along the straight edge of the fabric that we just squared off. At the same time, I am lining up one of the dark lines of the ruler along the bottom fold of the fabric. So I'm lined up here, I'm lined up here, I'm on the 15-inch mark, as the book says. I apply pressure and I cut. Then to cut my next strip, I simply slide the ruler over to the next number, which is 12.5. So I just slide the ruler to the 12.5 and I cut. Then I move it to the 10, which is the next number. And while I'm moving it, I'm also lining up a line on the fold. Then I go to the 7.5, then the 5, and then the 2.5. With practice, you won't even have to lay your rotary cutter down. You can just simply look over at the numbers, you watch your ruler, you're sliding your ruler over. Then when you're done, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 strips. And I said we needed 7, so then I would go ahead and cut 1 more 2.5-inch strip, and that would be my 7. So that is the simple method, simple technique or steps for the sliding ruler method. As I said, there's nothing magic about it. There's no specialized rulers. It's just going to take a little practice. And also the practice is squaring up the fabric with the 2 rulers and then moving your fabric from cutting it from left to right. Now if you needed to cut 7 more strips, you would simply pick up your fabric, pull it over, unfold it the rest of the way, and that's why we kept it folded up so that the fabric is being easily managed instead of having to work with these big pieces of fabric. And then since I've moved it around quite a bit, I would square it up again. And then I would go ahead and cut whatever strips are needed. One other thing I wanted to show you about the sliding ruler method is, I'm going to move this aside, this is the part I said I'd get back to later as far as that third column in the book. Let's say your pattern tells you to cut 80 2.5-inch squares. It doesn't tell you how many strips you need, it just tells you to cut 80 squares, which many of the quilt patterns do. So this third column is the number of squares that you would cut. So if I needed 80, I look for 80, there's 80, and then I would go across and say, oh, I'm going to need to cut 5 strips. So I already have my strips cut, or I'd cut 5 more strips, but let's say I've got the 5 strips here. So if I cut these strips into 2.5-inch squares, I will get the 80 that I need. And the way, again, you can use the sliding ruler method to cut these squares. So what I'll do is, you simply turn them around, and you notice I'm not unfolding these or anything. I'm trying to keep them as straight as possible. As you notice, once I cut my strips, I gently pulled them out in front of me. I didn't just sling them over, because once I do, they get messed up, and I'm going to end up cutting. When we cut strips, you usually end up cutting other pieces. So I was talking about we needed 80 2.5-inch squares. What you'll do is you pull these strips over and line them. This is when you actually use the lines on your cutting mat, because I'm going to take the bottom edge of this strip and line it up on a line on the cutting mat. And at the same time, I'm putting the fold on a vertical line. So I'm going to line up 3. You can actually cut 4. Depends on how big the ruler is that you're going to use. And what I'm doing is I'm lining these up in order to cut 2.5-inch squares. And what was the first thing I said we had to do first? We had to square the fabric, because I've moved this fabric all around. And I'm simply going to square it by lining up a line on this bottom edge, and then the same method, pick up the big one, hold it gently, slide it over, and then cut it. I slowed down a little bit on my cutting because I am cutting these different pieces, and there's a possibility they may move, but with practice, again, you can go fairly fast. So then, to pick up 2.5 inches, to cut 2.5-inch squares, I'm going to look at my book, and I see that my ruler, I have, as far as the length of these strips, they're about 10.5 inches. So I will start on the 10-inch. What I'm doing is cutting 2.5-inch squares. So what I'll do is I'll make a cut here, make another cut, and so on. Now when I make that first cut, remember there's 4 layers of fabric in each one of these stacks. So I've got 4, 8, 12, 16. So when I make one cut, I'm actually cutting 16 squares. We're going to start at the 10-inch line. I'm lining up the bottom edge and the straight edge here, and I cut it. Then I move it over to the 7.5. Cut, then the 5. Cut, and then the 2.5. And I have 16 times 4 is what? You might know. I was going to pull up my calculator. But now we have, with cutting 16 at a time, times 4, we now have 64 squares cut out of our 280 that we need. Okay. That, in 3 easy steps, is the sliding ruler method. I gave you more information as we went along, and there are many more tips and information in my booklet. We've also provided information for left-handed quilters, because this can get a little awkward for those who are left-handed. It's not just a matter of simply reversing the process that I've showed you. But anyway, that's included in the book. Again, we want you to cut less and quilt more by following this method. Just take a little practice, or practice some, and you'll soon be cutting more quickly and efficiently. Deborah Rubles with my book, Quilter's Cutting Guide, The Sliding Ruler Method. Thank you very much.